It was just another rainy night at the sanctuary, until a paralyzed veteran rolled up to a tiger's cage, holding a decades-old photo. The moment their eyes locked, the tiger let out a roar that shook the compound. Seconds later, armed men emerged from the trees, silent, lethal, and not there for the animal. What the tiger did next defied every instinct and exposed a secret buried in the jungle. But to understand why, we need to go back to where it all began. Raymond Carter was not a man who liked being looked at. At 47, with close-cropped gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, and a body confined to a wheelchair, he had made peace with silence. After his spine was shattered during a humanitarian convoy ambush overseas, he never talked much about his past. Instead, he moved to a small rural town in Montana and began volunteering at the Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary, a sprawling refuge for abused and rescued big cats. He wasn't there to be heroic. He just liked the quiet. The only creature he ever truly connected with was Shiva, a 600-pound Bengal tiger rescued 12 years earlier from a trafficking ring in Myanmar. The tiger had been found half dead in a shipping container, barely old enough to survive. At the sanctuary, Shiva had never harmed a soul. Most days he lazed in the shade of a man-made rock ledge or rubbed his giant face against the steel mesh as Raymond wheeled by. Staff joked that the old soldier and the tiger were two halves of the same scar. Raymond spent most of his afternoons near Shiva's enclosure, reading books aloud, not children's stories, but old novels like Call of the Wild or To Kill a Mockingbird. Shiva would often rest just feet away, eyes closed, as if the sound of Raymond's voice lulled him into memories too ancient to understand. But something was different on the afternoon of October 11th. It was a sunny fall Sunday. The sanctuary was full of visitors. Children squealed near the cheetah pen. Families gathered for scheduled feedings. Raymond sat under a redwood awning beside Shiva's enclosure, book in hand, reading aloud from The Old Man and the Sea. His voice, gravelly yet soft, was steady, until he noticed Shiva wasn't where he usually was. The tiger wasn't resting by the rocks. He was standing still, upright, head tilted, staring, not at the crowd, not at the staff, not even at the food bin, but directly at Raymond. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, the calm that had defined 12 years of Shiva's life shattered. The tiger's fur bristled, his mouth opened, not in a roar, not yet, but a low, vibrating growl. Raymond's voice faltered. What's wrong, big guy?" Visitors leaned in. A child laughed. Someone held up a phone. Then Shiva lunged, not at the public, but full speed toward the reinforced mesh, closing the space between them in a heartbeat. The sanctuary fell dead silent. The ground shook as Shiva's massive body slammed into the enclosure's inner fence. Dust spiraled. The steel mesh groaned but held. Visitors screamed and scattered. A baby started crying. The sanctuary's staff, normally relaxed and friendly, went into full lockdown mode. Raymond didn't move. He couldn't, but even if he could, he wouldn't have. His fingers tightened around the wheels of his chair, but his eyes never left the tiger's. Behind the rage, behind the primal charge, something else pulsed. Not fury, not hunger. Recognition. "Get him out of here!" shouted one of the rangers, sprinting toward Raymond. "Get the guests back to the safety path!" Staff surrounded Raymond as if to shield him, but he shook his head. "No, he's not attacking," he said hoarsely. "He's confused." The staff ignored him. Two men started to wheel him back toward the administration shed, but Shiva let out a sound unlike anything anyone had heard. Not a roar, not a growl. Something deeper, longer, like a moan through a centuries-old canyon. A sound of pain. And Raymond froze, because that sound, raw, broken, he had heard it once before. Not in this country. Not even in this life. But years ago, on the side of a jungle road in Myanmar, after an ambush where the screams of burning tires drowned out the gunfire, where a child had wailed, cradling the bloodied body of a creature with stripes. Raymond's hands slipped off his wheels. He had found a cage back then, crushed under bamboo, inside a dying tigress. Her body was broken, but her eyes had looked straight through him, calm despite everything. And next to her, a cub, barely alive, covered in ticks and grime, too small to roar, too weak to even cry. Raymond had called it in, gotten them rescued. And then, he left the military a month later. He had never known what happened to that cub, until now. His voice trembled. "Shiva?" The tiger had stopped thrashing. He now pressed his massive face against the steel, nose flaring, gaze locked on the man in the chair. One of the younger handlers, panicked, raised a tranquilizer rifle. Raymond raised his hand. "Don't. You'll confuse him more." The handler hesitated. "Trust me," Raymond said with steel in his tone. "That tiger knows me." The sanctuary went silent. Shiva, the 600-pound Bengal tiger once celebrated for his calm temperament, now sat motionless at the inner edge of the enclosure. His ears twitched at every sound, but his gaze never moved. He stared at Raymond, as if watching something invisible pass between them, something only the two of them could see. Inside the staff hut, a tense meeting had broken out. "Are you saying the tiger recognized him?" asked Kara Miles, the sanctuary's head curator, in disbelief. "That's not how memory works. He was a cub. He wouldn't remember." Raymond cut her off. "He didn't remember me. He remembered a moment, a smell, a sound. Trauma doesn't forget." Kara frowned, clearly skeptical. "That's not scientific." Raymond's fingers twitched in his lap. "Neither is what just happened." Later that day, when the sanctuary had cleared out and the staff had calmed down, Raymond wheeled himself back to the enclosure, alone this time. He didn't want an audience. Shiva was lying in the same spot. This time, as Raymond approached, the tiger rose, slowly, deliberately, and padded toward the fence, not as a predator, but as something else, something that had been waiting. Raymond stopped just feet away from the bars. "I never forgot you," he whispered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a weathered strip of military canvas, ripped from the sleeve of the uniform he'd worn the day he'd found the tigress. He held it to his nose for a moment, then to the bars. Shiva's nostrils flared. He let out a slow, breathy huff. And then he bowed his massive head, lowering it until it was almost level with Raymond's knees. It wasn't submission. It was recognition. Raymond's throat tightened. But something else started to stir. Something darker. As he wheeled back, his mind flashed back to that old mission report. The rescue of the cub had never been fully cleared. In fact, someone had tried to suppress the logs altogether. He remembered a stern colonel pulling him aside and telling him to forget that jungle stunt, that the tiger cub wasn't part of the official mission, that there had been other plans for that animal. Why? And why was Shiva, this exact tiger, now here, in a sanctuary sponsored by one of the same corporations that had armed that old conflict? That night, Raymond couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from the rising suspicion that what he had done years ago, what he had tried to forget, was finally circling back. And Shiva wasn't just remembering. He was warning. The rain came without warning. Thick, heavy sheets slamming down on the sanctuary roof as if the sky itself wanted to drown the place. Inside the facility, most of the staff had gone home early. Only Kara, A young volunteer named Jesse, 20, wiry, shaggy brown hair under a soaked hoodie, and Raymond remained. The sanctuary's backup power hummed under the pressure. But Raymond wasn't in the office. He was back at the enclosure again, and this time he wasn't alone. He'd brought a file, a decades-old manila folder that had somehow survived 3 tours, a spinal injury, and the deliberate erasure of half a jungle operation. On the front, Operation Backfire, unauthorized documentation. He laid it gently on his lap and rolled through the storm toward Shiva's pen. The tiger was pacing now, not frenzied, not angry, agitated, focused. Raymond stopped at the fence. His wheelchair tires sank slightly into the muddy path. His fingers trembled as he pulled the folder open and held out a grainy black-and-white photo, one of a small cub beside a burned-out transport cage. In the background stood a man, uniform half-torn, blood on his cheek, staring dead at the camera. It was Raymond, 25 years younger. "I didn't know what they were doing," he whispered. "They weren't rescuing animals. They were testing them, conditioning them." Shiva stopped pacing. He turned, walked straight up to the bars. Raymond kept talking, voice shaking. "You weren't supposed to survive, but you did. And somehow, they still brought you back into the system." Then came the sound that shattered everything. The lock on the outer gate clicked open. Kara and Jesse rushed out from the side building, soaked and panicked. "Raymond! The outer gate's been accessed remotely. Someone's here, not from the staff." Before the words had left her mouth, the outer floodlights snapped on, flickering as they did, and in that moment of half-light, they all saw them, 3 armed men in gray rain ponchos, moving like they'd done this before. Professional, efficient, not here to steal, here to silence. Raymond's voice hardened. "They came to finish it." Suddenly, Shiva let out a roar, not of rage, but like a warning flare. And then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He backed away, sprinted to the far side of the enclosure, and with impossible precision leapt the containment trench, claws catching the inner mesh as he pulled himself halfway up the outer fence, something no tiger had ever managed in this enclosure. One of the men panicked, dropped his rifle, and ran. The others froze. Raymond, rain pelting his face, wheeled closer. "You don't get to bury this." The lights blew out completely. What happened in the next 30 seconds would become a sanctuary legend whispered for years. When the emergency generators flickered back on, the armed men were gone. One had fallen, unconscious near the back fence. The others had vanished into the woods. And Shiva, he had returned to the enclosure, calm, soaked, still, but with one deep, bleeding gash on his flank and a look of finality in his amber eyes. Raymond sat, silent. The tiger had remembered everything, and now so had he. So